All right,
Okay,
thank you everybody for coming to JALT 2020. I would like to introduce our next presenter, Eric Koo, and he is going to be presenting on multimodal compositions for academic writing. Please go ahead.
all right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Eric, currently teaching at Akita University. And I'm guessing you guys are here because you're interested in multimodal compositions, right? You maybe you've heard of it, it's kind of been a kind of a buzzword. So, okay. Okay, so I'm gonna just start with a little bit of context of kind of where I'm coming from when I've approached multimodal composition. So I used to teach academic writing for university EFL students. And, there was a set curriculum. These textbooks might look familiar to you. I had to use the Focus on Writing textbook. And we had, we had 4 different essay assignments a semester. We're expected to go through grammar, vocabulary, collocations. And I think it's also common, to go through critical thinking, certain reading skills, different conventions in academic writing, like writing a thesis statement, citing sources, plagiarism, and just also other aspects of academic writing courses like peer feedback, revision, conferences with students, portfolios, and grading rubrics. So this is kind of the background of where I was trying to use multimodal compositions. And I felt like I had a lot of questions. Or I was kind of hesitant, I would say. I didn't feel like it always fit. I often wondered if there was time to do something multimodal, right? Something other than writing a traditional text-based essay. I wondered is this academic enough, for students to be learning? I wondered how would students perceive the assignments, the multimodal assignments? Would they take it seriously? Would they think like, why are we doing this multimodal thing? So what I'm going to talk about today is a method of doing multimodal compositions for academic writing, and the reason why I think this was effective was that it made for the students, it made the connection between a multimodal composition and academic writing very explicit. And the multimodal compositions were used to reinforce concepts that were traditionally and commonly taught in academic writing, like some of the things I've mentioned in the last slide. Okay, so I'm gonna skip right in, or I'm gonna go right into what the assignment looked like. So first, this is from the textbook. The textbook wanted students to write an argumentative paper about an environmental issue of their choice. And so that was going to be the first assignment. Now, the second assignment was the multimodal one, where I asked students to convert the traditional 5-paragraph text-based essay into an infographic. So so the topic that was supposed to be the same, the topic of assignment 2 was supposed to be the same as assignment 1. And the information and content was more or less supposed to be the same, but they were supposed to convert something text-based into something that was going to be more visual, things that included pictures and colors, things like that, something multimodal. Now, their third assignment was another part of the book, they wanted them to do a compare and contrast essay about 2 perspectives on a social issue. And so for this one, I flipped it around and I had them do the infographic first. So in the argumentative essay, they wrote an argumentative essay from scratch, like a text-based paper from scratch. But in this second part, the compare and contrast essay, they started out just by creating the infographic on 2 perspectives on a social issue. And then they converted that infographic into an academic paper, a traditional text-based paper. Okay, so this is what I'm calling, here's an example. So this is an example of the first paper, which is on an environmental issue. This student decided to write about the protection of leopard cats in Taiwan, and they converted it into this infographic. And the infographic is assignment 2. Okay, so you see the topic is the same about leopard cats. And the content, the data, the supporting evidence, the details were supposed to be the same as well, but in a different format. Now, the third assignment, the compare and contrast, was supposed to be about 2 perspectives on a social issue. And so this student chose the social issue is sex education in Taiwanese elementary schools, and the sort of pro and con arguments. And then they converted this into a paper. What we would recognize as a traditional academic paper. Okay. So this process included 4 different assignments and 2 different topics, and this is what I'm calling multimodal remediation-based composition. So if we're trying to use academic jargon to try to fit this into some of the literature, I think this is this is what I'm calling it. So I'm calling it multimodal because the infographic in particular requires students to present information using a combination of more than one mode. And when we talk about multimodal compositions, that's typically what we're referring to, is using more than one mode. That could be on paper, it could be digital, online, or digital as in using a computer, but it's basically more than one mode: text, image, sound, etc. So remediation here refers to sort of that conversion, the process of conversion, or remediating, to remedia, using or converting one form of media to another. And in sort of real life, I guess, real life, but we see this often when, for example, a book gets converted into a movie, or when an animation gets converted into a live action movie, for example. So this is the act of converting content from one form of media to another is quite common. And in this case, it's being done in the classroom with classroom assignments. And lastly, the composition aspect. So when we're using the term multimodal compositions, we're sort of talking about creating text and using a combination of modes to create some sort of text, coherent text. Okay. So what's happening here from a broader perspective is sort of asking students to start with traditional literacy, which is using language as the single mode for reading and writing, and sort of moving them and transitioning them into multimodal literacy, which uses different modes like pictures, sound, etc. It's like transition. So instead of just having them do something multimodal right away, we're sort of using the traditional essay as a stepping stone to help them sort of transition from traditional literacy to multimodal literacy. And the end point isn't necessarily multimodal literacy because, as I showed, students went back and converted an infographic back to an essay. So, the act of doing a multimodal composition also reinforces what we consider as traditional literacy. And I'll show, I'll explain specifically how in the following slides. So why use infographics? I chose a specific, there are many different types of multimodal compositions that could be done, but I specifically chose infographics because I think it's particularly conducive to academic essay writing. So one reason why infographics, because the structure is very linear. It looks very similar to an essay. So you can, so this is an example of an infographic that is this not from my students, it's just from the internet. It's like, I guess you might consider as a professionally done infographic. But you can sort of, I showed this to my students as an example of how an infographic, some infographics can have the same structure as an essay. So you might have the intro, and then you could sort of, and then you can sort of, the middle part there is where all the details, the supporting evidence, the reasons being given, the argumentation is happening in the middle portion. And at the end, you have the so what, sort of this conclusion, right? So I think infographics, it's multimodal, but it still retains a lot of the same structure as an academic paper, which is helpful in terms of transitioning from an academic paper, something text-based, into something multimodal. Another reason why infographics are pretty, I think, are pretty useful is because a lot of the different concepts of academic writing, it shares a lot of those concepts. So for example, like needing to make a specific argument. This is from my student, by the way. This is a student work. So needing to make a specific argument throughout the whole, infographic. You having to use specific examples, supporting evidence, relevant data, having to consider audience, considering tone and voice. What kind of tone are the visuals and the colors and the images conveying? Considering coherence. Is this infographic conveying a coherent message? And also providing references. So these are all different characteristics of the process of making an infographic that overlap with the process of academic writing. And plagiarism, of course. Some other, other aspects of infographic, particularly in the process of writing or process of composing. When students are doing the infographic, you can ask them to brainstorm and pre-write, plan and outline as you would for an academic essay. They definitely have to do research. You can have them do multiple drafts of revision, so reinforcing those ideas, the habit and the study skills for revision. You can use peer and teacher feedback. You can have in-class workshops if the computer technology is available. So you're not just reinforcing those technical concepts like or the structure and the technical concepts, but you're also reinforcing the writing processes that are commonly taught in academic writing. Now, I want to show this as an example of the peer feedback. So this is kind of peer feedback done in class. And the student here, they're talking about overpopulation. And this is something very common I saw in a lot of their infographics where, sorry. So for example, in this graphic of them dancing, one question is like, well, it looks nice. It looks like a great graphic, but what information is that actually conveying? What's the purpose of that being there other than looking nice, right? So in the process of revision, the student changed it into something that's more informative, visually informative. Another example is the second example down in the middle, and they converted it into something that was also more visually informative. And wordiness is a very common, because I think students are, when they're coming from, when this is an academic writing class, they think that they're supposed to write a lot. Or when they're converting an infographic from their academic paper, sometimes they just copy and paste entire, paragraphs. So you want them to be more concise on an infographic. So this is sort of like the process of revision. They'll change these things. So overall, in just kind of as a summary, I think infographics, they reinforce the concepts and processes that we typically want to or are expected to teach in academic writing classes. Furthermore, I think they demonstrate how concepts in academic writing can be applied into text outside of the classroom, something in quote real life, something that they can maybe relate to better. And also I think, doing infographics develops an awareness of how, their choices in font, text, like positioning, how those different choices help them achieve their communicative goals, whether it be for an academic paper or an infographic. Okay, now in terms of like those practical technical things, I used Canva. I had students use Canva, and I thought it was great. I think in general, none of my students had any problems using Canva. It's free, and it's pretty easy to use. I know from the examples I showed you, they all look pretty like well done in terms of the color and the the graphics and stuff. And Canva is really easy because it's all just provided for you, and you just need to drag and drop. And I'm not sponsored by Canva in any way. Okay, so in Canva, they have a whole bunch of different, types of text you can make, but one of them is an infographic. So you have to go under templates and click infographic, and they have a whole bunch of templates. One problem is that sometimes students will just choose a template that looks nice, but really has nothing to do with their topic. So for example, I've had students choose like an ocean template, and then their topic is actually on a forest, on forestry. But I think that's all still a part of the composition process, right? Like they have to be aware that all of those visual choices are important in the process of conveying their message. So, but anyways, there's a whole lot of templates to choose from, and most of them are free. And so when they do choose a template, it'll show up here, and on the, it'll show up in the middle there, and they can change any of the text, any of the colors, any of the fonts, any of the images, all of that can be changed. They can upload their own photos or images. They can upload their own charts, things like that. So overall, for something that's free, it's relatively flexible. I think it gave students enough sort of creative freedom to do, to create infographic that they wanted. And the best part is you can download you can download it as a PDF. So if you want them to submit it to you digitally, or if they need to print it out, all of that is fine because you can download it as a PDF for free. So yeah, so I went through this process with my students. I taught them how to use Canva. And then I think overall it was all pretty, it all went pretty smoothly. If anything, one problem was that sometimes a lot of their infographics looked very similar because they were all using the same program. But that's not, we're not designers, so that's not a big, to me, that wasn't a big issue. Now, grading infographics can be a little bit, it's new. I think it's new for us if we're mainly English teachers. We can use a rubric. So this is a rubric that I found from Indiana University Press. And basically the rubric, you can have all the aspects of a traditional sort of academic paper rubric, but add sort of the graphic and the visual elements. So do the visuals, are they relevant? Do they make sense? Things like that. You can also have them write like a reflection paper. This is, so this is from Shipka. It's a bit complicated because it's not for EFL students, but you can sort of change the wording to be more suitable for EFL students, but basically asking them, why did you make these decisions? What were you trying to achieve? Okay, I'm gonna skip this part actually. And so some of other teaching tips that I've just things that I from my experiences, it's really important to emphasize to students that it's not just about the individual assignments. Like, it's more about how are you connecting that academic paper to the infographic? How do these two different assignments connect, even though they're in such different formats? It's really important to teach them how to read infographics, certain vocabulary words about infographics, like the word infographic, for example, or just different types of graphs. And it's important to analyze with them, like, what do effective infographics look like? And what do ineffective infographics look like? I found it really helpful also to borrow terms from academic writing when talking about infographics. So I use the term supporting evidence, even though that's not traditionally, an infographic term, but I thought that was helpful to reinforce that concept from academic writing. And I think it was also, lastly, I think it's really important to emphasize to them that the visuals are important. Don't just pick the pretty picture because it's pretty. It needs to be meaningful, and it needs to convey, information of some sort. But really, so if you're interested, Hafner has another great example that's not infographic, but Hafner had students create a video documentary based on a scientific question, and then converted that video documentary into a written scientific report. So that's another example of a multimodal remediation-based composition that's not related to infographics. But basically, the remediation that we're talking about can be any kind of text-based composition converted to a multimodal composition, or vice versa, right? So it's from a broader perspective, like, that's what we're looking for, is converting something that's solely text-based into something multimodal. And lastly, like, I think for me, I had more creative freedom. So in my class, so I was able to do both ways, but you don't necessarily have to do that. And I think the first having students convert text into something multimodal is probably the easier method to go with, because students are more familiar with writing an academic paper. So that's probably the best way to start. Okay. Okay, I think I'm running out of time, so. Okay, yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. If you want to unmute yourselves, give a round of applause for a minute.
Oh.
And I'm going to say it's 18:19 now, but there's not another presentation in here immediately after because it was canceled. So if you wanted to talk for just a couple minutes, I can give you a couple minutes for question and answer. So,
okay.
But I think Thomas Amrand had a question. Amrandred, sorry.
That wasn't really a question. It was more of a comment. I'm a multimodal researcher, although I work with classroom data, classroom multimodality, but I'm familiar with it as effectively. Victor Lim Fay, K.O. Halloran, second author of that. She was one of the reviewers of my dissertation. So, so that's why I'm here. I was just really interested in reading your presentation and and the kind of teaching that you're doing. It sounds really interesting, and I would really strongly encourage you with the work that you're doing. Take it to the next step and do some analysis, because this is a big topic. There's lots of work doing on it, and it sounds like you probably have a tremendous data set just with the work that you've received from your students.
Yeah,
and it'd be really interesting to read that analysis. But just as a presentation for teachers, this is really interesting, and thank you very much for sharing it. And I will probably be using some of your ideas over the next few years. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
Great. Thanks for your comment. Yeah.
Did anybody else have any other questions or comments they want to make? Feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask if.
Sorry, Eric, just one question. So did you mention about how much experience your students did or didn't have in using something like Canva, or making infographics in general?
Yeah, I don't think they had. Well, I asked them if any of them knew of Canva, and they didn't. Yeah, and I don't think they had experience, because there was some so I think sometimes there was, yeah, I don't think they had much experience. I mean, but they're, you know, they're like, they're college students. So I think like, you know, they're like, what are they? Are they Gen Z? Is that what they are? But anyways, you know, I
or
think they were
younger.
like pretty, like, I think once I showed them through once, they were all pretty, if anything, I would say if anything, there were problems with like maybe them using, almost being maybe a little bit lazy with, so for example, students would, I feel like they were using images that weren't very
Okay,
informative.
or yeah,
Yeah,
right.
images that looked pretty, images that looked, yeah. So like,
That
for
problem with
example,
presentations.
huh?
Have that problem with presentations.
Right.
Same thing.
So like
Yeah.
global warming, you can expect, you know, a picture of the Earth, you know, and you know, yeah, and almost rather than so to me, the problem wasn't necessarily like them not having the technical skills, but maybe not thinking critically enough about their choice of, you know,
Right. I find
images,
it
color.
sometimes that, you know, people use those generic photos as shorthand, right? Like this globe represents global warming, but it is not very informative. It's a sign, and it's, you know, supposed to stand for so many other things, but it's not actually giving that much information. So I like the, you know, idea of that infographic and showing how that can be used, because they are exposed to it so much, I think, in media, right? So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, for that, and riffing off of what Don just said, it might be interesting to look at, to encourage us teaching this and grade evaluating the degree of how semantically dense the information is. So like how many meanings, like you talk about the globe, there's all those meanings, but as you said, it's not, you have to be connected to the context in order to understand that. So you don't, that's the reason why it's not effective. In order for it to be effective, it has to be disconnected from a context. So you have to have images of the globe with, you know, sweating or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, that will make it less connected and more abstract so that people can see it. Another thing that might be effective to consider is, I'm wondering, how do you teach that resemiotization from the writing to the infographic? How do you show them what information is important that has to go in textual form, and what information is, no, you should put this image? And how do you evaluate that? Because you have to have, as a teacher, instinctively, if not explicitly, you have to be evaluating that.
Yeah, I mean, no. So one really great example of what you're talking about is like data, basically, like so numbers, right? I think one tendency that I saw students have was just to write things in words, and not to sort of think a little bit further about how could I convey this visually, like how could I convey this data, you know, like 8 out of 10, you know, people, blah, 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 something like this. So how can this be conveyed visually? And, you know, if for them to do that, it does take maybe a little extra work, right? They have to create a graph or a chart, or they have to, you know, they can't use the ready-made visual images that Canva provides, right? But I think like showing them examples of that, like in class, like, and asking them like, when you're looking at your essay and thinking about what aspects, you know, how you're going to convert it, you know, what are the pieces of information that are most important, but also like can be conveyed, can be visually portrayed. Yeah, I think something that was also really helpful was going through like ineffective infographics, which you can find online. You know, there are definitely a lot of blogs. It's not even, they're not even meant for EFL students, right? They're meant for like designers, I think. But there's a lot of examples of ineffective uses of, you know, visual tools. So I think that's really helpful too.
Okay, have you come up with any sort of, I don't know, shorthand or ways to teach students, okay, this is what to do, this is what not to do, rather than just, I mean, okay, you let them figure it out for themselves, but that's kind of a wasteful way of teaching, right? We try to show our students a little bit how to, you know, this is what you should avoid before they make the mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Have you found any shorthands for doing that?
Yeah, no, not yet. I haven't. Yeah.
Okay. Because probably it sounds to me like you already have this. You probably have these ideas. And you
Yeah.
just sort of express them. And again, in multimodality research, you've got lots of. I see lots of names I recognize, lots of titles I recognize. It's probably in there, and so that's probably maybe the next stage of your project. Because this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you guys off here.
Sorry.
But thank you very much. Give another round of applause, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now.
you.
And what I was gonna say, it sounds like you guys are having a great conversation. If you want